Good evening, welcome to LWL Hartford. LWL Hartford stands for Live, Work, Love Hartford, and its Knowledge Corridor region. And we define the Knowledge Corridor region as the Metro Hartford, Springfield, New Haven region, which is the 20th largest, give or take, 20th largest market in the United States with over 2.77 million people. And come about a month from now, we're going to have our new commuter rail line, the Hartford line. That'll be connecting all three areas, and it'll be a game changer. We have a number of steering committee members from LWL Hartford. They're present tonight. I'll take them in the order I've written down, but Yanil Tiran, she's right here in the front. She's Executive Director of the Center for Latino Progress. Jim Boucher is Executive with Capital Workforce Partners. In front there. Thank you, Jim. Jennifer Cassidy, sitting next to Jim. She's Executive Director of Business for Downtown Hartford. She's also an advocate, still an advocate for the Asylum Hill neighborhood. Dr. Thomas Swar, right here, second row. He's now teaching at Yale. He's a former engineer with one of UTC divisions. Jeff Stewart. Where's Jeff?
Hiding in the back.
Hiding away in the back up top. Hey, Jeff. Jeff is with Connecticut DOT, and he's also an advocate for the nation's oldest municipal airport, Brainerd Airport. And I'm Peter DeMalley. I'm president and founding principal of Design Professionals, a consulting practice in South Windsor. We're civil engineers, landscape architects, urban planners, and the like. So our events are always free. They're 90 minutes, start 5:30, and we're over by 7 o'clock. Always on the last Wednesday in the month, with the exception of November and December due to the holidays. We advance it a week or two. And they're always for free, and we don't want your money because we have to keep tabs of it, and we don't want that. So don't try to give us any donation. Thank you very much. So tonight's program, we will be on Hartford Public Access Television, so we'd like to thank HPA-TV, Gil Martinez and Company. Thank you. We've got a couple of crew members here. Thank you very much for broadcasting it, rebroadcasting it to a wider audience. Also, we'd like to thank Trina Gallo and her staff from Spotlight Theaters here in Hartford. They've been very generous to us in providing this facility, not only for our networking before and after out front at their bistro, but also for providing tonight's Theater 4 for downtown. They've been very good to us, so we would hope that you'd look at programming for HPA-TV, and you'd also support Spotlight Theaters coming when you want to go out to the movies, have dinner, have your favorite alcoholic beverage or non-alcoholic beverage, that you come down here and enjoy yourself at Spotlight Theater. Our next program event will be on April 25th, most likely here. We'll announce it later, and we're working with a number of possible speakers, great speakers with some timely topics. We haven't firmed their schedules yet, so we'll have to decide which one can fit for April 25th, but that's the last Wednesday in the month. Very likely here. Once we have confirmation from them, we'll confirm the venue. As you know, we sometimes rotate around downtown Hartford, but that'll be coming up on Wednesday, April 25th. We look forward to your participation. Tonight's speaker is Wildaliz Bermudez. Let me just run through a little bit of her bio. She's a Hartford City Councilwoman. She's a minority leader with the Working Families Party. She's a plaintiff from the original Chef v. O'Neill case, which fought for the improvement of public schools in Connecticut, highly regarded. During her professional career, she started working for the City of Hartford in 2009 in the Mayor's Office of Constituent Services, and then she was promoted to a policy analyst for the City of Hartford, where she founded the Green Action Team and initiated the city's first Clean Energy Task Force. She holds a master's degree in environmental studies from La Universidad Metropolitana in Puerto Rico, and a bachelor's degree right here in Hartford from Trinity College. She's produced 2 environmental documentaries. She's served on the board of a number of organizations in the area, including the Center for Latino Progress, Connecticut Landmark Society, Connecticut Alliance for Basic Human Needs, the Roberto Clemente Tribute Organization, and Latinas en la Resistencia. She also, for a day job, she's program director for CHISPA, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, CHISPA, an environmental justice program with the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters, and I want to hear more about that. She's committed to bringing forth environmental awareness and helping to create new platforms for environmental advocacy throughout Connecticut. And since November of 2017, just last November, she's been working tirelessly to assist climate change refugees from Puerto Rico who are arriving in Hartford, and that is what she's going to be talking about tonight. You'll run through it, or you want me to run through just your program for tonight, Lydia?
Sure.
Okay, try that. Her topic is the plight of Hartford's climate change refugees. Councilwoman Bermudez will address the plight of Hartford's climate change refugees from Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, displaced by Hurricane Maria, that horrible Category 5, was it, hurricane, I believe, that devastated those two islands. Her presentation will review the scope of the problem, its impacts on the refugee families, many of whom have lost everything, and on the city of Hartford, as well as the performance of FEMA and other governmental agencies during the Hurricane Maria crisis, which is ongoing. To date, over 400 children, I don't know what the number is now, but over 400 children have enrolled in Hartford schools. You imagine what that does to the budget, among other things, and programmatically. Many families are in temporary housing, including hotels. Councilwoman Bermudez will also speak to environmental awareness and advocacy. So without further ado, we'll introduce Wildaliz Bermudez, and she's our speaker from the Hartford City Council. And thank you very much for joining us tonight.
So speak into the mic, right? Hi, good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing tonight?
Great. Good. Spring is here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a great opportunity just to share with everyone in the community what's been happening on the ground with the families that are arriving from Puerto Rico. It's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because, as many of you know, I myself am Puerto Rican. I lived on the island for 4 years, right after I completed my bachelor's degree. Most of my family continues to live on the island, with the exception of, my most immediate family. I have a very small family here, so I could only point to 5 individuals that actually live in Connecticut, but the rest continue to live on the island. So I will cover this presentation, our new neighbors, a look at our new neighbors, Puerto Rican climate change refugees. And so to start, I want to go back in time a little bit and just also figure out how many of you before I start, how many of you have actually traveled to Puerto Rico? Show of hands. Okay, that's good. So I would say half of you here in the audience have traveled to Puerto Rico. For those of you who haven't traveled to Puerto Rico is pretty much comparable size to Connecticut in terms of geographically. 3.3, about an estimate of 3.3 million Puerto Ricans live on the island. This was according to reports from 2017. There's certainly a lot of U.S. mainland Puerto Ricans that live here, close ties, and there's always, we're known to have that connection between 1 foot on the island and 1 foot on the mainland, right? An example is my own family that continues to live on the island. And so when the first hurricane hit, which was Hurricane Irma, it was a Category 4. And people thought, some people were impacted, some people had to leave, and certain parts of the island were impacted more than others. But others on the island overall weren't as impacted, and so they thought, oh, it's okay, no worries, we have this covered. And all of a sudden, Hurricane Irma hit. Hurricane Maria hit right after Irma. And it was a phenomenon that people just were left in shock, in a state of shock. So as we go through this presentation today, I don't know if I have I do. As we go through this presentation today, I want all of us here in this room to really put yourself in the shoes of these families, many of whom have lost everything and are surviving on very little, and would love for you to walk away from this presentation not just knowing what happened during the hurricane, how are the families now, but also what we can do as a community to help them and to continue to help more of the families that are going to be coming in. And so with that, first slide. This is in Utuado, I know that many of you have seen some of these photos already. Wildaliz is right in the center of the island. Was one of the hardest hit places right after Hurricane Maria, and people were literally trying to swim to safety to get out of the hazard zone. Unfortunately, there are a lot of locations throughout the island that the municipalities, people had no warning, the residents had no warning, and because Hurricane Irma first came through, and it wasn't, in many places it wasn't as much of a shock, even though it was Category 4. Los puertorriqueños se prepararon a último momento. So the families prepared at the last minute for Hurricane Maria and didn't really expect for there to be such a big impact. The devastation that was left, these are additional photos. Again, I'm sure you've seen them, and a lot of the slides that I'm using are from various sources, Newsday, New York Times, Hartford Current, and so on and so forth. But this is what the damage was. Some homes, their entire roofs were ripped up, uninhabitable, clearly. And in some towns, that also meant not just uninhabitable homes, but also the access to the roads completely wiped out. This is, again, a photo of Wildaliz. I've used two photos of Wildaliz because Wildaliz is close to my heart. It's actually the place where I got married. It's a beautiful place in the center of the island, right in a mountainous area, and the people there had to make do. And in this example, they created their own ladder to go from one part of Wildaliz to one side of the neighborhood to the other side of the neighborhood. And people get very resourceful. So this is an example, of course, of someone who's trying to transport items from one side to another. Now, keep in mind, right, that the island of Puerto Rico, prior to Hurricane Maria, is an island that, as of 1920, there was the U.S. Merchant Marine Act, which you guys are familiar with, known as the Jones Act, which made it so that anything that would be imported to the island had to have a rubber stamp approval of the U.S. And so it couldn't have supplies, in this case, right after Hurricane Maria. You couldn't have supplies coming in from other areas, whether it was Venezuela or wherever. It could be anywhere in the world. It had to go through and get the official customs from the U.S. But the Jones Act was lifted for 10 days right after Hurricane Maria. And so people are probably wondering, well, what does that have to do with anything? So the connection here, of course, is that prior to, and this has been for decades upon decades, the majority of the supplies that are coming to the island, along with food, 85% come from the U.S. Now, that might be a shocker for most of you, thinking, but how is it possible? I've traveled to Puerto Rico and everything's so lush and green, and clearly vegetation is everywhere. You could throw something in the ground and it grows very quickly. How is it possible to import 85% of what you need and your meals and food? But that is the case in Puerto Rico. And that's dictated, of course, by policies that have been set forth and makes it very hard for the people on the island to be able to provide for themselves when we're looking at agriculture, right? So if it's very expensive for you to be a farmer and you can't sell your produce because it's cheaper for you as a consumer to buy something and purchase it food-wise in a Walmart in Puerto Rico, then how are you going to really make money? So cities towns that were hardest hit, really, the entire island was devastated, but this one in particular I want to point out because it's the town of Yabucoa, which is where Hurricane Maria came through, and it's the town where I'm from. It's the town where I was born in, and it's right where it all started. Yabucoa is a coastal area, and it's known as el municipio de los azucareros, the sugar region. And so hardworking people who have sacrificed so much to be able to provide for their families, and everything was wiped out in a matter of hours. The impacts beyond just the food supplies and the food rations following Hurricane Maria, 85% again of the island's food is imported. So imagine what that does shortly after a hurricane. Not to mention access to water. Access to water, the quality of water wasn't the best before. It's actually, the water was not when they inspected it prior to Maria was on a very low scale. But after Maria, when the Department of Health in Puerto Rico did their inspections, they said they averaged that around 2.3 million individuals had been drinking contaminated water. So the CPR Health Department confirmed this. So what did the water have? They found that the water had E. coli, it had fecal contamination, and the list goes on. These are dramatic impacts on people's day-to-day lives. Not being able to have shelter, a roof over your head, not being able to have food, access to food, and of course, clean drinking water, which is everyone should have access to. Some of you might be wondering, well, it's been 6 months, so things certainly they should be improving. They're a lot better. Not quite so. And that leads us to how a lot of the families continue to come here, to places like Hartford. So the situation right now is so dire on the island with horrible access to water. Schools being closed. Many schools have been closed. Some are on the verge of closing. They're going from a public school system to now it being turned to a charter school system. That means that for some individuals who worked 30 plus years as school principals or school teachers and thought they were all set with their retirement packages, the retirement packages are being wiped out. The pension is being pretty much turned into, obliterated and turned into nothing as the pension money reduces. So those folks who remain on the island have these real worries and fears to live with. Food, shelter, pension, retirements, unknown certainties, schools being closed, and also medical care. Many of the island's hospitals have not been able to treat their patients in the best way possible because a lot of doctors have had to leave without having proper resources sent to them. That includes things like medicine and all the other items that are needed to run proper working hospitals. Which leads us to the families who are arriving to Hartford. Displaced and homeless again. This was a story that was featured right here in Hartford. Many of the families who are arriving, some of them are staying at the Red Roof Inn. There's other participating hotels. In Hartford in particular, there's 3 participating hotels, but there's more throughout the region. And this is the general sentiment of most of the families who are here. They've come here because they've lost everything, and those who perhaps didn't actually lose their physical structure of their house, but their house is uninhabitable. It has contaminated water. They were able to clean some of the water off, but the actual contamination is still present, or there's mold inside the homes, and there's other worries and fears that they have with their structures not being inhabitable. People breaking into their homes is another issue that's happened. And so they became homeless, and now they're homeless here. They're living in hotels that FEMA provided them with temporary shelter assistance known as TSA vouchers, and are really having a difficult time. This is one of the families that was staying at the Red Roof Inn, Brian and his wife, and they have 2 little babies. And this is a close look at what some of the family, who they are, what they look like. These are families who have very young children. Some of them also have teenagers. These are senior citizens. These are veterans as well. And so a variety of people who've come here to really seek asylum. And I'm calling them climate refugees. And I say I, and I probably might have some agreements in the room or some disagreements. But climate refugees, because we live in a world where there is real climate change that's happening, number one, and they are seeking refuge here. But because, as you know, Puerto Ricans, we are U.S. citizens, we are not considered to be refugees in the way that we, in Hartford, in places like Hartford, we've hosted our Bhutanese community and we've said, you are refugees. We will be able to provide you with X number of services because you are refugees. You're leaving your natural country. But there's a lot of read between the lines, and I think you get where I'm going with that. So the families who've been staying in the hotels, and Hartford, I want to also point out, has been the most active region. We're region number 3 when we're considering the entire state of Connecticut. There are 3 participating hotels in Hartford, but certainly many others. New Haven is an active region. Also, Wyndham is another one. Waterbury is another one. And so what we found is where there are many Puerto Rican families who are already there, that tends to be where the TSA voucher activation system has been activated. And also wherever there are Puerto Rican families that were able to receive friends, loved ones, their own cousins, people that they knew from Puerto Rico, people are taking in these families as well. Problem here is, though, that FEMA has, on several occasions, said that they were going to end funding to the TSA voucher program for the families who were staying in hotels like Hartford. So the first wave was on January 13th. That was the first date that the families were told that they had to leave the hotels. The second date, around February 14th. The third date, March 20th. You see the pattern? So basically every month, these families have been living in the state of fear, not knowing where, if they could continue their stay there or not. The reason why the TSA assistance program is crucial is because the whole point of it is, while these families, as they open their cases with FEMA, because they lost everything or their homes are uninhabitable, while they're waiting, they're supposed to have somewhere they could stay. And somewhere they could stay is Hartford. And yet, what we're seeing is that FEMA has been closing a lot of the cases of these families, some of them without FEMA without any reason, and other reasons that they have given to them is insufficient information. Another reason that was very interesting that was told to one of the families staying at the hotel, it's because you're now in the US. The list goes on, and it's really unacceptable. This is a photo of that was given to me by one of the families at the hotel. And so, beautiful mountain area. If you look closely, that's a broken structure. The broken structure on the far right is the house that they lost. That's their house, their wooden house that they lost. And those are the kids sitting on top of the house shortly after the hurricane. Everything packed, boarded up, packed in a truck. But there's really resilience in the community because these families have been fierce advocates for themselves and really fighting with dignity and saying, we demand to be treated equally. We are US citizens, we are human beings. We are here to receive assistance temporarily, just so that all we need is a little push. That's all they've been saying from the beginning. All we need is a little push. Some of these families, from day one, they've been able to find work. And some of them have met a lot of obstacles along the way because of English. Others have met obstacles along the way because of racism. For example, going into different offices, whether it's been DSS, at one point they've been receiving information. The families have been told by, and I don't want to generalize, but one family in particular whose story they mentioned to me said, I went to DSS, I was looking for basic assistance, and I was told that they couldn't help me. I said, well, why? And she said, well, they said that I didn't have the right paperwork. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. But every family has experienced some kind of obstacle along the way, but they have been continue to be resilient, and they continue to tell their stories every step of the way. This is a press conference that was held. This is at a meeting with Congressman Larson's office. The families have met with pretty much every level of government that you could possibly think of. They've met with Senator Blumenthal. They've met with Senator Murphy. They have met with Congressman Larson. They have not only had meetings here in Hartford, but they've also had meetings in DC. They've had meetings with the senator that's in charge of the Energy Committee, for example. They've been advocating not just for themselves and their situation that they find themselves in, and also for their kids. Many of the kids right now, if we look at Hartford, there's over 450 students who are enrolled in our public school system. And if we look at the number of individuals that have come through, there's more than 1,850. And so they continuously advocate to make sure that their children have the right resources. They've also met with the state, at the state level. They've also met with our state senators and our state representatives and delegation. This is at one of the demonstrations that was held on February 28th. Again, pointing out that they're advocating for what's happening on the island, No Promesa, the Junta Fiscal, the board that was appointed to control and manage Puerto Rico's debt. But also they're advocating for their own kids here. One of the families who I met with last week said, you know, I have my daughter in one of the Hartford schools, and she's a brilliant student, and they have her sitting down in front of a computer at hours at a time. And I said, well, how often is she getting tutoring so that she can, you know, get up to speed with English and learn English? And she said, well, only once a week. So there's issues that are happening on the ground that need to be resolved, along with finding stable places for them to live here in Hartford. Many of the families, if you ask them, they say, will you go back to Puerto Rico or do you want to stay? The majority that I've spoken to have said, I'm going to stay because I don't have anything in Puerto Rico anymore. Things were bad before the hurricane in terms of the economy, and they're worse now. At the same demonstration, just other photos in front of the state capitol. The families have also held vigils. So they have used different approaches to really call attention to the issue. The issue is to make sure that people don't forget, hey, we're here, we're human beings, we need your help, we are your new neighbors, and we're gonna stay. We wanna stay, we wanna make a better life for ourselves here and for our children to really have opportunities. This is actually in Washington, DC. There have been amazing volunteers along the way, and the work that has been done on the ground since day one, since the family started to come around November up until now, really the volunteers have been activated, and they have been able to really commit to the families, support the families through case management work, wraparound services, trying to help them navigate where to go to. And they've done it in a way more expedited way than city, state, federal. And that's just the honest truth. The volunteers have done an amazing job. Volunteers like the woman who you see there with the green hat, her name is Carrie Firestone. She lives in Avon, Connecticut. She is very passionate environmentalist, mother. As soon as she heard about the families, she said, how can I help? I live in Avon. How can I pull together my resources? And she said, let's do Operation Project Housewarming. I said, Project Housewarming? That sounds interesting. So she called on everyone that she knew in her community and asked them, hey, do you have any furniture that you don't need right now? I know that your son, your daughter is away in college. I know that so-and-so left and you're now an empty nester. And so she really pulled together her resources and she created Operation Housewarming. and this is the delivery of Operation Housewarming's second project. These stories have been featured through WNPR. WNPR has been doing really amazing work in showing on a monthly basis what's happening on the ground with the families and the volunteers that are coming together. This is one of the individual who's actually lifting the bureau. He is moving into one of the apartments after moving out of the hotel. Volunteers that were participating in that second project housewarming, so not just from Avon, but really there were Trinity College students, there were faith-based leaders, communities from all over, as far as Newtown, Connecticut, and as close to Hartford, so throughout the entire state. Families testifying, so again, local, state, federal, and continue saying what's happening on the ground and the need is housing. These families are looking for housing. The families are looking for better access to programs at the school level for their children. And these families are looking to make sure that their loved ones on the island also are not forgotten. Because, let's face it, August is right around the corner. There's going to be another hurricane coming through. And with the climate changing the way that it is, we're hoping that another Category 5 doesn't hit the island. And so this is one of the little boys I was staying in the hotel. And that's a look at our new neighbors, Puerto Rican climate refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, Wildaliz. That was very moving. And I know I have a number of questions, but we'll go to the audience. We're going to go around with microphones, so if you could raise your hand, anyone who has a question, we'll count those right now. We'll get started.
Swar, given their temporary status, will they be able to vote in November?
Yes, given their temporary status, yes, they can vote in November. Like I said before, a lot of the families have said, when I've spoken to them, they've said, I'm going to stay in Hartford. I don't have anything in Puerto Rico, other than, in many cases, loved ones, but in terms of their homes are lost.
I don't have a question, but I think it's worth noting that the community in Puerto Rico has been treated very poorly by the federal government. And there's data that shows that FEMA and other federal office has treated Puerto Rico unlike any nation before. Haiti, was treated very well. They got a lot of resources in a very limited amount of time. We went to them. Puerto Rico has been ignored by the federal government, and I think that we need to look at that, because there's no reason that a nation like the United States that goes everywhere in the world helping other nations, an island that belongs to them with 3.3 American citizens and more, have been ignored by the federal government. It's just, I just wanted to make a note of that.
You're absolutely right. And one of the things that we've seen from day one, the lack of political will this is my personal opinion, from 45. So that's a clear indication, right? And so these families who they're showing me on their phones the loss that they have. Their homes gone, wiped out, or if they haven't been wiped out, completely, the structure's almost falling apart, but yet FEMA's telling them, oh no, you can repair your house. They can't repair their homes. And so, especially not when, in many cases, you have a big sector that relies on, who are employees, public sector employees, and the rate of unemployment has really risen in Puerto Rico because the employers are either leaving or their jobs are being completely gone. They're vanishing. They're closing those positions altogether. And so what's happening is, yes, the lack of response intentionally, I would say, at the federal level.
You indicated 450 children have enrolled in the Hartford Public Schools to
Right
date.
now, today, 450 children have enrolled in the Hartford Public School System. That is not including the charter schools or the magnet schools that are run through CREC. That's just the public schools in
Do
Hartford.
you have any indication how many children, you mentioned a number of, I think, 1,850, is that statewide?
1,850. That's just in Hartford, individuals.
Individuals, in Hartford alone?
Mhm.
Wow. And have you heard anything about how the impact on the city's budget with respect to all the new children that are enrolling in the public school system? the
Yeah,
district?
so Hartford is supposed to be getting around $3 million at the federal level. However, those funds that are coming in, and especially in the next 2 weeks, each school district, instead of having the state receive those funds and then have it go to each municipality, each school board, those funds, each school district has to apply for themselves as you would a grant. So in 2 weeks from now, places like the Hartford Board of Education, they have to participate in a webinar in order for that's step one, to be able to then apply to this formal process to receive the $3 million. But again, 450 students, you all know the climate that Hartford is in when it comes to schools. We are closing schools, we're consolidating schools. 450 students to date is going to increase. Every day they receive more and more students. That was last week's figure. Every single day there are new students being enrolled in Hartford Public Schools. 450 students is one entire school. And so certainly $3 million, we need more. And the timing. So.
It's no secret that President Trump lacks any evidence of human empathy whatsoever, and I was appalled to see that the Jones Act was repealed for a mere 10 days. It seems like it should have been repealed for 10 months. And we don't get a lot of updates now on the progress that Puerto Rico has made recently to restore the infrastructure, power, roads, all of that. Can you tell us about that? Do you know, the last I heard was that I think power was restored to about 75% of the island, but, and the other question I had was, and I don't know if this is a rumor or not, but there were a lot of big pharma facilities in Puerto Rico, and that adversely impacts our emergency rooms here with certain things that, consumables that are needed in emergency rooms. Thank you.
Yeah, so in reference to the number of people now with power, those numbers are very skewed, because at one point they were reporting, well, half of the island now has power, but they're counting the folks who are running their generators to receive, to be able to, to be able to do everyday things like cook and to have a little bit of electricity, or to run their breathing machines. And so those numbers that we were receiving at the federal level are very skewed, not just when it comes to the electricity or energy in general, but as well as when it comes to the death rates that have impacted on the island. The folks who died, the people who died following Hurricane Maria, underreported, significantly underreported. There were people who on the ground were saying, look, I worked at a hospital and we just had to leave. And so a lot of bodies had been incinerated also during that process, and so not a real understanding of identifying people. And also mentioning on top of that the suicide rates that have tripled on the island after the hurricane as well. So that's one piece. And the second piece, the question again?
About big pharma facilities,
Oh, yes, so
manufacturing.
the big pharma facilities. Yeah, so Puerto Rico, that is one of the main industries, the pharmaceutical companies. And, you know, right now, we can say the pharmaceutical companies, before that, petrochemical plants. People typically assume, Puerto Rico is really sustained by tourism. Actually, it's not. What I'm concerned about with the petrochemical plants, or many of them were closed in the late 80s, but also with the pharmaceutical companies, is the levels of contamination that have been left unregulated. And because of the hurricane, a lot of things are being lifted up. And so I think that in reference to pricing issues, yes, I'm sure that we're going to be seeing pricing issues. Us as consumers here that are relying on medicines that are made in Puerto Rico. But from a more global aspect, I'm really concerned about the wellness of the people on the island, their health, as it relates to all the contamination that is now surfacing because of leftover by pharmaceutical companies, and as well as really bad policy choices like the coal ash in Peñuelas and 3 other participating cities. So those are immediate concerns.
What charitable enterprises have been stepping up in the absence of appropriate federal response? AmeriCares, other organizations have stepped up in Puerto Rico to help out, to fill in the gap?
There have been several organizations that have stepped up, and I think probably Janine might be able to share more information on that. But one of the things that I've seen, whether it's on the island or here helping the families that have arrived, the volunteers are really making the biggest push. The communities themselves on the island that are saying there's one story that I read of a town where the mayor called on all the retired trabajadores de la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica. So he called together all the retirees that work for the actual electrical company, and he said, you guys know, you have the know-how. We have the equipment, so let's just get us back on the grid ourselves. And they did. And so it's happening faster that way than waiting and relying on big names or relying on the government to be able to speed things up.
So what can happen here? How can people
Yes.
volunteer and help out?
Would love to have you guys, anyone who's interested in volunteering, whether that's hosting a project housewarming, part 3, 4, or 5, whichever, in any capacity, whether that's, collecting furniture, maybe you might know of someone, whether that's sitting down with a family and saying, hey, I can help you look for different employment opportunities. The need is great, and so would love it if any one of you could help out in different capacities. But right now, the main things are, right, in terms of their needs, looking for employment as number 1. While some of the families have been able to find things very quickly, they took the first immediate job, but really now that they're moving into apartments, in order to really pay for that apartment in the best way possible, to have real living wage jobs, not just working at a fast food restaurant. So they have a lot of skills. So we're talking about folks, some of them who have master's degrees. We have teachers, nurses, construction workers, electricians, and the list goes on. But housing is the most immediate, and jobs, those would be the main 2. And also looking for someone to be their friend as well. So it's really hard coming into a new place and not knowing anyone.
I I mean, this is important to me as well, since my sister and my brother-in-law have been without power 209 days today. But in your role, in your real job, that you work with HPA, can you let us know, tell us what is HPA and how the whole community of Hartford can help with your HPA organization? How can we do, because climate change, it affects the island of Puerto Rico, but we have seen how have heard Texas and Florida and California, the whole nation is struggling with climate change. And I think that we had a horrible winter. And I think that as a society, we need to do more for the common good. And you are positioned to be able to help us to be part of that community that's working toward somehow stopping what is happening with our climate.
So I am the program director of HPA. HPA means spark in Spanish, and it is a program that's based out of the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters, and we work on conserving the planet overall. But really specifically to Connecticut, the HPA program is a program to encourage and have a new group of environmental advocates, especially when we look at environmental justice issues on the ground. We are training groups of youth high school students and as well as parents to become more involved and to think about things like climate change and the realities of it. And we're doing various campaigns, and by campaigns I'm specifically referring to, for instance, many of you know that the Volkswagen settlement funds are coming through, right? And Connecticut is slated to receive a large portion, or I shouldn't say a large portion, but we're slated to receive $50 million, and every state has their own portion in the millions. And so we're looking at that, at things like that that are coming through Connecticut to say, first and foremost, those funds, we have to also earmark them for environmental justice communities, and specifically those school boards and those municipalities that need extra additional assistance on environmental justice issues. We know that in places like Hartford, African Americans and Latinos, Blacks and Latino children are disproportionately face the highest asthma rates of all. And so since those funds are coming in and earmarked for transportation, can we start getting rid of phasing out those diesel buses? And so that's one example. But really the program itself, the concept of it and what we aim to do and what our goal is, our mission is to really incentivize and create a new wave of environmental leaders in our community. And we're doing that through a community organizing platform. And that relates to climate change very much, because when we look at policy issues and when we look at planning for our local communities, we have to figure out how the two align and create better systems.
So one thing is jobs. And we had a speaker last month, CEO of Capital Workforce Partners, and he was discussing the initiatives at hand right now, where we need to work the most. And we have lots of job opportunities in advanced manufacturing. So we need to get many, many more people trained in the skill sets necessary for working with metal, primarily metal products, because there's huge backlog in orders, and it's a very dominant industry in our region. For example, Pratt & Whitney has, I think, a $1 trillion backlog in jet engine orders, and their subcontractors do a lot of the work, and they're ramping up, and we're going to need replacement workers, because for over roughly a 10-year period, we're going to be losing half of our workforce, skilled workforce, to retirement. So we need to, there are plenty of opportunities there, so needing to getting access for these people to get access to job training programs, which means transportation to those job training programs, and taking care of the home front as well. Supporting a family at the same time is another issue. But how do we get these people into those programs so you have developed the skills for long-term employment in advanced manufacturing. It's the key. And we discussed that at our last event. Perhaps we can somehow facilitate some program through Capital Workforce Partners, and many other entities are working on that problem right now. How can we get people into the skilled training programs that are available at Goodwin College, Asnatech Community College, and other programs?
That would be great, and if we could pass out a sign-in sheet of anyone who wants to volunteer, get involved, has in contact information that I otherwise wouldn't, anything that you could put what it is, what category it is that it would fit into, and that would be very helpful to continue the work, because in the end, this is a community process and this is a collaborative process. And without community partners and each and every single one of you in this room, then really the families are going to have a tough time, but Hartford is going to have a tougher time, because they are here, they're our residents, and so, and our school system is going to have a really difficult time, and we don't want that. We want the best. Thank you.
Well, thank you for enlightening us about the climate refugee crisis here, and what we can do in Puerto Rico, and also what we can do here. And hopefully, through this and the rebroadcast through HPA-TV, we can learn more about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder, we'll get more information out with respect to next month's program on last Wednesday in the month, April 25th, most likely at this location, this venue, but we'll apprise you of that. And we'd like to thank HPA-TV with respect to recording this and recording here. Thank you. Recording this program and rebroadcasting it to a wider audience. And also would like to thank Trina Gallo and the staff here at Spotlight Theaters and their Front Street Bistro for accommodating us this evening and other times, and also other venues around here. We've been to Infinity Music Hall right across the street many times. They've been great to us, and thank you very much to them. So please patronize these organizations as you can. For example, go out to the theater, go to a show over across the street at Infinity Music Hall, etc., and come downtown. Thank you very much, and good evening.